So in this video, we're going to take a look at powers and roots. Let's start off with some nice, easy, simple warm-up questions. What we're going to do is square each of those numbers in part A. So if I do 1 squared, it means 1 times 1. Well, of course, that is going to be 1. 5 squared means 5 times 5, which is 25. 7 squared means 7 times 7, of course, which is 49. And 14 squared means 14 times 14. You might not know that in your head. It's 196. Now, in part B, we're asked to find some given square roots. But these are related to part A, because if I want to find the square root of 25, well, that is going to be 5, because that means what number multiplies by itself to get 25? And of course, it's the reverse operation as squaring something. So it's 5. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 196 is 14. Okay, now we can carry this on and make sure we really understand what that exponent or index is doing. And when I talk about an index or exponent, I am looking at the smaller number at the top right of the base number. So what this tells us is the number of times you're going to multiply the base by itself. So 3 cubed means 3 times 3 times 3. Well, that's going to be 27. 2 to the power of 4 means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Now, if you're doing this in your head, do it in stages. 2 times 2 is 4, and then 4 times 2 is 8, and then that 8 times another 2 is 16. So 2 to the power of 4 is 16. Now, as well as doing powers, we can undo these operations as well. Now, if I'm doing 4 squared, which is 16, if I want to undo that, I could take my 16 and square root it to get back to 4. Now, if I wanted to do 4 cubed, well, that's going to be 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. Now, the inverse operation of this is a cube root. And we write it similar to a square root with a little 3. And that is really saying to us, well, what number is it that multiplies by itself 3 times to make 64? And of course, it's 4, because 4 times 4 times 4 makes 64. Now, we can do this with all sorts of powers. So, for example, if I had 2 to the 4, I've already said in this lesson, is 16. Well, if I wanted to do a 4th root, so what number times it's by itself, 4 times to make 16, of course, that is the inverse operation. That is going to be 2. So that is a little explainer there. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Let's do some practical questions. So if I have a square and its area is 225 centimeters squared, what is the length of each side? So if it's a square, the numbers are the same. Each side length, the height and the width are exactly the same as one another. So I need to think, well, square root then 225. A number times itself to make 225. Well, if you don't know it, you can do it on a calculator. It's going to be 15 centimeters. Now, a square has an area of 140 centimeters. So let's just draw that out, very similar to the last question. Okay, so 140 centimeters squared. How long are the sides of the square to the nearest millimeter? So just like in the last example, if I want those side lengths, I know they're the same because it's a square, I'm going to need to square root. So if I work out the square root of 140, that is going to be 11.8321. Let's just write a few of these out. 1, 5, 9, 5, 7. Let's stop there for a second. Okay, now that is 11 centimeters, but I want it to the nearest millimeter. So that means that I need 1 decimal place. So I could write it like that because there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter, 11.8 centimeters. Okay, now This is an interesting question. Let's think about this. So copy the statement below and complete each one, putting 2 consecutive whole numbers in the empty spaces. So in this question, we're asked not to work out what, for example, in a root 70 is, just to think about what whole number it could be between. Now, we know, or we should know, that root of 64 is 8. We should also know that the root of 81 is 9. Now, root 70 is, well, 70 itself even, is between 64 and 81. So the root of 70 is going to be between the root of 64 and the root of 81. So it's going to fall somewhere between 8 and 9. Okay, so we're using a little bit of logic to help us to work this out. Now, at this point, it might be a little simpler if we wrote out some square roots. So square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 4 is 2. And let's see if we can figure them all out. Okay, so hopefully you know some of these. The square root of 3 is 9. The square root of 4. Sorry, the square root of 9 is 3, I should say. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. The square root of 100 is 10. The square root of 121 is 11. And the square root of 144 is 12. So these are going to help us to identify where we are. Right, so 90 is between 81 and 100, so it's between 9 and 10. The square root of 5, well, 5 is between 4 and 9, so it's between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. So that means we're between 2 and 3. For D, we're between 1 and 2. For E, 115 is between 100 and 121, so we're between 10 and 11 somewhere. And the square root of 39 is between 6 and 7. Okay, I hope that helps you to understand a little bit more about powers and roots.